Hey, welcome back to the Nero world. Today we're diving into another Nero Wolfe mystery. Smart, sharp, and worth every minute. The woman who arrived at the brownstone on West 35th Street at 3:17 on a Tuesday afternoon in October was the kind who made you want to check your wallet and your assumptions simultaneously. She was somewhere north of 50 and south of 60. Dressed in the sort of understated black that costs more than most people's rent. And she carried herself the way old money carries itself, as though gravity were something that happened to other people. I watched her from the front window as Fritz let her in, and I'll say this much, she didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like a woman who had made a calculation and was prepared to act on it. Her name was Constance Hallowell Bourne, and she had telephoned at 9 that morning, requesting an appointment with Nero Wolfe. I had told her, as I tell everyone, that Mr. Wolfe's morning hours were reserved for his orchids, that his afternoon was not his own between 4 and 6, and that his evening disposition depended heavily on what Fritz had prepared for dinner. She had said, with a precision that I respected, 3:15 then, I shall be punctual. And she had been, give or take 2 minutes. I showed her into the office and made the introductions. Wolfe was behind his desk, which is where he spends approximately 93% of his professional life, with a beer in one hand and what appeared to be a monograph on Cattleya hybridization in the other. He looked up at her with the expression he reserves for clients who interrupt his reading, a kind of benevolent contempt, which is the closest thing to welcome he usually manages. Mrs. Hallowell Bourne, I said. Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe inclined his massive head approximately 2 degrees. At a seventh of a ton, he doesn't go in for elaborate physical courtesies. Be seated, madam. She sat in the red leather chair across from his desk, the client's chair, as I think of it, positioned so that Wolfe can observe a visitor's face in the light from the windows, without any inconvenient shadows, and folded her hands in her lap with the kind of composure that is either genuine or very well rehearsed. I settled at my own desk to the side and picked up my notebook. You are in difficulty, Wolfe said. It wasn't a question. I am in a situation which I believe requires your specific talents, she said. My husband has disappeared. Wolfe set down his monograph. That, from Wolfe, is the equivalent of anyone else sitting bolt upright. Disappeared, he repeated. 3 weeks ago. His name is Reginald Hallowell Bourne. He is 64 years old, in good health, and a man of very fixed habits. He has not been seen since the evening of October 3rd. He did not take his medications, his passport, or his razor. His car is in the garage. He simply ceased to be present. You have informed the police? The police, she said, with a delicacy that conveyed volumes, are satisfied that my husband left of his own accord. They point to the fact that he withdrew $40,000 in cash from a personal account on October 2nd. They have suggested, with what I can only describe as diplomatic tactlessness, that a man of means sometimes chooses to begin again. I wrote 40K cash Oct. in my notebook, and added a small question mark. And you disagree with their assessment? Wolfe said. My husband was many things, Mr. Wolfe. He was stubborn, occasionally overbearing, and constitutionally incapable of remembering anniversaries. But he was not a man who ran away. He was, above all things, a man who controlled. He had spent 40 years building Hallowell Bourne Capital Management, and he was in the final stages of revising his estate, a process he described as his most important remaining work. She paused. He would not have walked away from that, not voluntarily. The estate revision, Wolfe said. Tell me about that. She did. Reginald Hallowell Bourne had, according to his wife, spent the better part of the past year working with his attorney on a comprehensive revision of his will and associated trusts. The original documents, drafted some 12 years prior, distributed his estate estimated by financial press at somewhere between $40 and $60 million, among his wife, his 2 adult children from a prior marriage, and a scattering of charitable foundations. The revised documents, which as of October 3rd had not yet been executed, apparently made significant changes to those distributions. How significant? Wolfe asked. I don't know the specifics. Reginald was private about financial matters, even with me. What I know is that he met with his attorney, a man named Prescott Dane, 4 times in the month of September, and that after the last meeting, he was altered. Altered how? She considered the word carefully, which told me she was either genuinely thoughtful or had rehearsed the conversation and was choosing to perform thoughtfulness. Quieter, more watchful. He had always been decisive, but in those last weeks he seemed to be weighing something, as though he had arrived at a conclusion that he wasn't entirely comfortable with. And the other beneficiaries? His children from the previous marriage? Marcus and Sylvia. Marcus is 38, Sylvia 35. Both are involved in the business to varying degrees. Both were aware that their father was revising the documents. Both had, separately, attempted to speak with him about it. Attempted, I said. She looked at me for the first time with full attention. He declined those conversations, with some firmness. Wolfe's eyes, which had been half closed in the way that means he's paying maximum attention rather than minimum, opened slightly. Mrs. Hallowell-Bourne, I must ask you directly. Do you believe your husband is dead? Outside, a taxi horn made its brief editorial comment on the state of Manhattan traffic. I believe, she said, that something was done to him. Whether he is dead or merely sequestered, I cannot say. But I do not believe he walked out of his life voluntarily. I believe someone arranged his disappearance. And you want me to find him? I want you to find out what happened to him. If he is alive and has chosen this, I will accept it, however painful. But I will not accept the police's comfortable theory without someone of genuine ability examining it. Wolfe looked at her for a long moment. I could almost hear the gears turning. Not that Wolfe's mind sounds anything like gears. It's more like the movement of a vast, silent mechanism, the kind that keeps accurate time without any visible effort. Mr. Goodwin will require a complete list of persons connected to your husband's business and personal affairs, he said finally. His attorney, his business associates, the children, any others of relevance. You will also provide whatever documentation you have regarding the estate revision, correspondence, appointment records, anything. I will require a retainer of $10,000. She opened her handbag and produced an envelope. I anticipated that, she said. The documentation will be delivered by tomorrow morning. As for the list of persons, I have it with me. She handed me 3 pages, handwritten in a script so precise it might have been typeset. I scanned the names. Prescott Dane, attorney. Marcus Hallowell-Bourne, son and vice president operations. Sylvia Hallowell-Bourne Crane, daughter and VP client relations. Dwight Faber, CFO, Hallowell-Bourne Capital. Eleanor Voss, personal assistant to RHB. 5 names. Wolfe usually likes to work in chambers of 5 or fewer. It keeps the geometry of suspicion manageable. One question, I said, looking up from the list. You mentioned your husband withdrew $40,000 in cash on October 2nd. Do you have any idea what it was for? None, she said. I did not know about it until the police told me. Had he made similar withdrawals before? Not in recent memory. And his relationship with the attorney Dane, was that long-standing? 15 years. They were also, I believe, personally friendly. They played chess on alternate Thursdays. I wrote Chess Dane and underlined it, not because chess is inherently suspicious, but because alternate Thursdays is the kind of specific routine that a man of fixed habits maintains, and any disruption of it might be worth knowing about. After Mrs. Hallowell-Bourne left, punctually at 4:03, just beating Wolfe's retreat to the plant rooms by 12 minutes, I spun my chair around and faced the desk. Well, I said. Well, Wolfe agreed, which from him is practically a soliloquy. Missing husband, unexecuted will, $40,000 in cash, and 5 people who all had reasons to be interested in the outcome. It has a certain structural elegance. It has several structural elegances, Wolfe said, rising with the majestic deliberateness of a mountain deciding to take a stroll. And at least 3 significant peculiarities which Mrs. Hallowell Bourne either failed to notice or chose not to mention. Want to share? Not yet. You will call on the 5 individuals tomorrow and form your own impressions. I prefer your observations to be uncontaminated by my preliminary conclusions. He paused at the door to the hall. Ask Fritz to send up the Remicourt Chablis with dinner. I find that Blanc goes better with unexecuted wills. He went upstairs to his orchids, and I sat looking at the 3 pages of handwritten names, and wondering which of them, if any, knew where Reginald Hallowell Bourne had gone, or more to the point, which of them had arranged for him to go there. Wednesday arrived with the kind of thin, pewter-colored light that Manhattan produces in October when it wants to remind you that the warmth was temporary and always was. I had breakfast with Fritz, which is one of the genuine pleasures of working for Nero Wolfe. The man pays his chef what a junior partner at a law firm makes, and the results justify every cent. And by 8:30, I was in a cab heading uptown. The offices of Hallowell Bourne Capital Management occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a building on Park Avenue that had been built in the 30s and had decided, rather sensibly, to simply remain distinguished instead of chasing contemporary fashion. The lobby had marble floors and uniformed attendants, and the elevator moved with the unhurried confidence of an institution that has never needed to rush. I saw Marcus Hallowell Bourne first, partly because his office was on the 14th floor and I was starting at the bottom, and partly because I wanted to see the children before I saw the employees. Children of missing wealthy men are always instructive, because they occupy a peculiar position. They are simultaneously bereaved and, depending on the will, potentially enriched, and watching someone manage that combination tells you a great deal about their character. Marcus was a solidly built man who had inherited his father's jaw and apparently his father's preference for expensive suits and minimal expression. He had the look of someone who had been handsome in his 20s and had since traded handsomeness for authority, which is usually a good deal. He stood when I came in, which was well-mannered, and gestured to a chair, which was efficient, and looked at me with eyes that were doing considerably more calculation than his face admitted. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Constance hired Wolfe then. I thought she might." "Mr. Wolfe is looking into your father's disappearance, yes. I have some questions, if you're willing." "I'm willing." He sat down. "I want my father found, Mr. Goodwin. Whatever you may have heard, or whatever Constance may have implied, I want him found." I noticed the formulation, "whatever Constance may have implied," and filed it away. "When did you last see him?" "October 2nd. We had lunch, here in the building. We ate in the small conference room on 15. He preferred that to going out. Fritz sends up something from the kitchen." He caught himself. "The building has a kitchen service. Good one, actually." "What did you discuss?" The pause that followed was brief, but definite. "Business matters, the quarterly allocation review, client retention strategy for the new year." "Not the will?" His jaw moved slightly, which was the most I'd get from him in the way of involuntary reaction. "No." My father had made it clear he didn't wish to discuss the revisions until they were finalized. "But you knew revisions were underway." "Of course. He told us, Sylvia and me, in July. He said he was updating the documents to reflect current realities. He didn't elaborate." "How did that land?" "I beg your pardon?" "Being told your father was rewriting his will without elaboration. How did you take it?" Marcus looked at me with the steady, slightly dangerous calm of a man who has conducted a great many negotiations. "I took it as information, Mr. Goodwin. My father was 64 and in good health. He had every right to arrange his affairs as he saw fit. I would not have presumed to press him on the details." "Admirable restraint," I said. "Did Sylvia share it?" Something crossed his face, Not quite a smile, and not quite its opposite. You should ask Sylvia. I intended to. One more thing. Do you know what your father withdrew $40,000 in cash for on October 2nd? And before you ask, I didn't know about the withdrawal until after he disappeared. The police told you? They told both of us, together, at our mother's, at Constance's house. They seemed to feel it explained everything. His voice carried a precise, controlled contempt for the police's satisfaction. $40,000 is not enough money to start a new life if you are Reginald Hallowell born. My father spent more than that on a single painting. That was a fair point, and I made a note of it. Sylvia Hallowell-born Crane was on the 15th floor, and she was everything her brother was not. Or rather, she was the same things expressed in completely different terms. Where Marcus was contained and architecturally composed, Sylvia was kinetic, bright-eyed, and radiating the specific energy of someone who has been managing their anxiety through sheer force of personality for several weeks. She was attractive in a sharp-featured way, with her father's chin and what I guessed had been her mother's eyes. The first wife, that is, not Constance. She was on her feet when I came in, and stayed on her feet for most of the conversation, moving between the window and her desk, with the restlessness of someone who normally thinks better in motion. "Has anyone found anything?" she asked, before I'd properly sat down. "Not yet. That's why I'm here. The police are useless. They decided in the first week, and nothing has shifted them." She paused at the window and looked out at Park Avenue. "My father did not leave. That is not who he is. Whatever else he was not a man who abandoned things." "What else was he?" She turned and looked at me directly, which I appreciated. Difficult, demanding. He had very specific ideas about how things should be done, and he did not easily tolerate deviation. He was not unkind, I want to be clear about that, but he was not easy. She sat down across from me. He built this firm from nothing, and it never entirely stopped being his. Even now, even with Marcus running operations, and me running client relations, every significant decision came back to him. He was present. Always present. Which is why his absence is so loud. "He was revising his will," I said. "Yes." "Do you know what changes he was making?" "No. He wouldn't tell us." She said it simply, without the careful architecture her brother had used. I asked him once, in September, and he looked at me in a way that ended the conversation. Not angry, just final, like a door closing. "Were you worried?" Of course I was worried. We'd both expected, that is, the existing will was quite clear about the business succession. Marcus and I would have equal shares, with the management structure kept intact. If that was changing, she stopped. "I don't know that it was. I'm speculating. Who else knew about the revisions?" "Prescott Dane, obviously. Dwight Faber, our CFO. Father mentioned it to him as a financial planning matter. Eleanor, probably. Eleanor Voss, his assistant. She knew everything he did before anyone else did." "What's your read on Eleanor?" She considered this. "Loyal. Extremely loyal. She's been with Father for 11 years, and she treated his interests as indistinguishable from their own. Whether that's admirable or something else depends on your perspective, I suppose." A pause. "She was also one of the last people to see him. She was in his office until 6:30 on October 3rd. "And your father left when?" "According to the building security log, and the police checked this, he left at 7:14, alone. And that was the last anyone saw of him. I had the information I needed from the children, at least for the first round. What I had were two people who were worried, or performed worry very convincingly, who had known about the will revision, who claimed not to know its contents, and who had both, in their different ways, pointed me toward Prescott Dane and Eleanor Voss. I found Dwight Faber in the CFO's corner office, which had been arranged with a financial man's aesthetic. Clean surfaces, rows of matching binders, 2 screens showing market data, and a third showing a spreadsheet that he minimized when I came in. Faber was 52, trim, precise, with the kind of face that processes information so efficiently it doesn't leave many traces of the process. He had an accountant's careful stillness about him, which I've always found either reassuring or unsettling, depending on the circumstances. He answered my questions in the flat, factual manner of a man who has spent his career presenting information without editorial contamination. He had last seen Reginald Hallowell Bourne on October 1st, in a routine financial review meeting. He had not been aware of the cash withdrawal until the police inquiry. He knew the will was being revised in general terms, as it affected his own forward planning for the firm's ownership structure. He had not been consulted on the details. Did Mr. Hallowell Bourne seem different in the weeks before his disappearance? I asked. Faber thought about it. He seemed focused, more so than usual. He was already a focused man, but in September he had a quality of concentration that was somewhat unusual. He canceled 2 external meetings, which was unlike him. He asked me for a comprehensive valuation of the firm's assets, full liquidation analysis, in mid-September. Liquidation analysis? Why would he want that? I assumed it was for estate planning purposes. A will revision of that scope would require accurate valuations. He paused. Though he asked for it in a format I'd typically associate with a sales scenario rather than an estate document. I mentioned it, and he said the format was fine. I wrote that down carefully. A liquidation format valuation for estate purposes. That was interesting. That was, in fact, the first thing I'd heard all day that Wolfe would probably call a peculiarity. Eleanor Voss was not at the office. She had, according to the receptionist, taken personal leave beginning October 4th, the day after Reginald Hallowell Bourne disappeared, and had not yet returned. She was still nominally employed. No one had moved to change her status. She simply wasn't there. I got her address from the receptionist, who gave it to me with the slightly guilty efficiency of someone who knows they probably shouldn't, but feels that circumstances warrant it, and I flagged a cab downtown. Her apartment was in a building in Murray Hill that was several steps below what her salary at Hallowell Bourne would have justified, which was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was that she answered her buzzer on the first try, which meant she was home. And the third thing I noticed when she opened the door was that she had been crying. Not recently, but repeatedly, and for a while. Eleanor Voss was 41, slight, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of quiet, intelligent face that you don't notice immediately and then can't stop noticing. She looked at me with eyes that were tired and wary in equal measure, and she let me in without much resistance, which told me she'd been expecting something like this. "You work for Nero Wolfe," she said, when I'd explained myself. "That's right. Mrs. Hallowell Bourne hired him. Also right." She was quiet for a moment, standing in her small, neatly kept living room. "I'm not sure what I can tell you," she said. "I've gone over it in my mind for 3 weeks, and I'm still not sure what I know and what I'm afraid of. We can sort them out." She sat down, and so did I, and she told me that on the evening of October 3rd, Reginald Hallowell Bourne had been in his office until approximately 6:30, as Sylvia had said. Before she left, he had given her an envelope, sealed, and told her to hold it, not to open it, not to deliver it, simply to hold it, until he instructed her otherwise. "Do you still have it?" I asked. "Yes." "Do you know what's in it?" "No." She looked at her hands. "He made me promise not to open it, and then he disappeared, and I didn't know whether the promise still applied, and She stopped. "I've been sitting here for 3 weeks with an envelope I'm afraid to open." It was, I thought, the most human thing anyone had said to me all day. I thanked her, got her number, and told her not to open the envelope yet. Then I went outside and found another cab, and thought about the fact that somewhere in this city a man had vanished after withdrawing $40,000 in cash, requesting a liquidation format valuation of his company, and entrusting a sealed envelope to his personal assistant. By the time I got back to the brownstone, I gave him my notes, the full narrative, not just the facts, because Wolfe reads people through other people's observations of them. And when I finished, there was a silence of about 90 seconds, which is, for Wolfe, practically breathless. "The envelope," he said. "I know," I said. "And the liquidation analysis." "I know. And the fact," he said, opening his book, "that Marcus Halliwell Bourne told you he and his father discussed business matters at lunch on October 2nd, and did not mention that October 2nd was also the day his father withdrew $40,000 in cash, which means either he didn't know, or he knew and chose not to mention it. And in either case, we should find out which." Fritz announced dinner. Wolfe rose. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will bring me Prescott Dane." Prescott Dane's offices were in a building on Lexington Avenue that managed to convey, without any vulgarity, that the people who worked inside it were very expensive, and knew it. The reception area had the hush of a library, and the carpet of a cathedral, and the young woman at the desk looked at my card with the measured expression of someone trained to be impressed by nothing, while actually evaluating everything. Dane himself came out to meet me, which was either gracious or strategic. In my experience, when a man of his standing comes to the lobby, instead of making you wait, it means he's decided to manage you personally, rather than filter you through staff. He was 61, silver-haired, with a patrician face that had learned over the decades to reveal nothing it didn't intend to. He had the easy authority of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms where people told him their secrets, and the careful warmth of one who had learned to use that authority without appearing to. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, shaking my hand with a firmness that managed to feel like both a welcome and a boundary, "I understand Nero Wolfe has taken an interest in Reginald's situation. I'm glad someone with real capacity has been engaged." He brought me back to his office, which was the kind of room that confirms everything you suspected about its owner. Books arranged with precision, a desk that was old and genuine rather than decorative old, photographs on a sideboard showing a younger Dane with various luminaries in various decades. On a separate, smaller table near the window, a chessboard, mid-game, pieces arranged with evident care. "You and Mr. Halliwell Bourne played chess," I said. He glanced at the board. "Alternate Thursdays for 12 years. The last game was September 25th. He paused. "I haven't put the pieces away. I keep thinking he'll come back, and we'll finish it." A beat. Sentiment, I suppose, in a man who's not supposed to have it. I sat down, and we looked at each other for a moment, in the friendly adversarial way that happens between two people who both know the conversation matters. "How much can you tell me?" I asked. "I understand there are privilege considerations." "There are," he agreed. "However, Reginald has disappeared, and I have been living with a particular weight of conscience for 3 weeks. I will tell you what I can." He folded his hands. The will revision was extensive. Reginald spent the better part of 8 months working through the implications before he was ready to put anything on paper. The drafts Lee worked on in September represented his final conclusions. What changed from the original documents? Several things. The most significant, and I can tell you this because it is directly relevant to his safety, which I believe supersedes normal privilege considerations, was that Reginald intended to remove Marcus and Sylvia Halliwell Bourne from the management succession of the firm. I kept my face arranged pleasantly. "Go on." "Under the original documents, the firm would pass to the children in equal shares, with a management structure that effectively gave them joint operational control. Under the revision, the firm was to be placed in a management trust, with a board of independent trustees, and the children would receive income distributions only, no operational authority. The capital would eventually pass to a foundation he was establishing." That's a significant change. It is. It effectively ends the dynasty model he'd spent 40 years building, in favor of an institutional one. Reginald was, He had arrived at certain conclusions about his children's capacity to manage the firm long term. Not their character, he was careful to say, their judgment. Dane paused. He was also troubled by what he described as a misalignment of incentives. He felt that the existing structure created pressures that might, over time, compromise the firm's integrity. Did he say what kind of pressures? Not specifically. He said he had seen enough to satisfy him. A careful pause. Mr. Goodwin, I want to be precise about what I tell you, because I am walking a line that I take seriously. What I can tell you is that the revised documents were never executed. They were in final draft form. Reginald had a signing appointment scheduled for October 7th, 4 days after he disappeared. Did anyone else know the specific contents of the revision? No one should have. He said should have with the particular care of a man who had been thinking about it for 3 weeks. The drafts were maintained securely in my system. Reginald had a copy in his personal safe at the office. I prepared no intermediate copies. And yet, I said, his jaw set slightly, 3 days before his signing appointment, Reginald called me. It was September 30th. He told me that he believed someone was aware of the revised terms. He wouldn't say how he knew. He asked me whether there was any possibility of a leak from my office, and I told him there was not, and I believe that to be true. He then said something that I have thought about every day since. He stopped. What did he say? He said, "Prescott, I've made a move I can't take back. I need to see whether the other player will respond honestly or dishonestly. If honestly, we're fine. If not, I'll need to be very careful." He looked back at me, and then he went on to discuss the signing appointment as though the matter were settled. That was the last time I spoke with him. I thought about that on the way back downtown. Reginald Hallowell-Bourne, 3 days before he disappeared, had described his situation to his attorney, in chess terms. He had made a move. He was waiting for a response. He was prepared for the possibility that the response would be dishonest and potentially dangerous. He'd also, the next day, withdrawn $40,000 in cash. The picture was assembling itself, and it wasn't a comfortable one. A man who believes he may be in danger, who is 3 days from signing a will that would dispossess his children of operational control of a $50 million firm, who takes a large amount of cash and hands a sealed envelope to his assistant, and then vanishes. The move he described to Dane, what was it? He told Dane he believed someone knew the will's contents. Had he confronted them, warned them, or something more subtle? The kind of move a chess player makes, one that appears to be something other than what it is. I stopped at a diner on 34th and had a cup of coffee and thought about it. Then I called the brownstone. "Wolfe," he said, with the monosyllabic authority he reserves for the telephone, which he dislikes. "The will cuts Marcus and Sylvia out of management control of the firm," I said. "Everything goes to a trust and eventually a foundation. Signing was scheduled for October 7th. There was a silence. Not the silence of surprise. Wolfe is rarely surprised by human motivation, but the silence of something slotting precisely into place. "And Dane believes someone knew," he said. "Hallowell-Bourne told him so himself, 3 days before he disappeared. He described it as a chess move." Another silence. The liquidation analysis Faber prepared, in what format exactly did Hallowell-Bourne request it? Faber said it was formatted like a sale analysis, rather than an estate analysis. He flagged it, and Hallowell-Bourne told him the format was fine. He was preparing for a sale of the firm, Wolfe said. Or for someone to believe he was preparing for a sale. I held the phone and looked at the coffee I hadn't touched. "That's the move," I said. He leaked the idea of a sale, not the will. He wanted to see how someone would react to the possibility of the firm being sold. And the reaction told him what he needed to know, Wolfe said. Which is why he told Dane the response might be honest or dishonest. "Come home, Archie. I want to hear everything in sequence, and I want Fritz to make the boudin noir tonight. I find I need something with substance." By the time I got back and laid it all out for him in the office, with Fritz's dinner sending remarkable aromas from the direction of the kitchen, 3 things had become clear to me. First, that Reginald Hallowell Bourne had set a deliberate trap for someone he suspected of having dangerous intentions. Second, that the trap had apparently sprung because he was gone. And third, that the $40,000 in cash, the sealed envelope, and the vanished man were not 3 separate mysteries. They were parts of a single, carefully arranged move by a man who played chess and understood that sometimes you sacrifice a piece to expose the opponent's position. The question was whether the sacrifice had been voluntary. "Archie," Wolfe said, as Fritz appeared at the door, "tomorrow morning, before I go to the plant rooms, I want all 5 of them here. 7 o'clock. Yes, I know what I'm asking. Tell them it is not a request. Marcus Hallowell Bourne, Sylvia Crane, Dwight Faber, Eleanor Voss, and Prescott Dane. And ask Miss Voss to bring the envelope." Getting 5 people to a brownstone in Manhattan at 7 in the morning on a Thursday is not, in the ordinary run of things, a simple matter. It becomes somewhat more manageable when the invitation is issued in the name of Nero Wolfe, and somewhat more manageable still when you are able to convey, without quite saying so, that the alternative is for the case to develop in directions that the invitee might prefer to participate in shaping. I made the calls Wednesday evening. Marcus required the most persuading. He was a man who preferred to control the terms of any meeting, and being summoned by anyone at any hour offended his structural instincts. Sylvia agreed at once, with a quickness that suggested relief. Faber said, of course, in his flat, factual way. Dane said he would rearrange his morning. Eleanor Voss said she would be there, and her voice had in it the specific quality of someone who has been alone with a secret for 3 weeks and is very tired of it. By 7:10, all 5 were in the office. Fritz had set up extra chairs, and the room had the peculiar atmospheric quality of a gathering that everyone present knows is consequential. Wolfe came down the stairs at 7:14 with the punctuality he employs when he wants to make a point about punctuality, settled himself behind his desk, and surveyed the room with the expression of a man examining a chessboard that has been set up, finally, correctly. Marcus and Sylvia sat on one side, not quite together. There was a space between them of about 18 inches that might have been physical, but felt psychological. Dane was to the right, composed and watchful. Faber had his hands flat on his knees, his face neutral. Eleanor Voss sat apart from the others, slightly, with a manila envelope on her lap that she held with both hands, as though it might escape. "Good morning," Wolfe said. "You are here because Reginald Hallowell Bourne has been missing for 22 days, and because each of you holds a piece of information that you have not fully shared, with the police or with anyone else. I intend to collect those pieces this morning." "Mr. Wolfe," Marcus said, with controlled but genuine irritation, "I resent the characterization. I have been fully cooperative. You told Mr. Goodwin that you and your father discussed business matters at lunch on October 2nd, Wolfe said, without raising his voice. You did not mention that you had, 3 days prior, confronted your father about the contents of his revised will. The room changed temperature. Not visibly, nothing so dramatic, but something shifted, the way pressure shifts in a sealed space. Marcus was very still. "I didn't confront. You visited your father's office on the evening of September 29th, Wolfe said. The building security logs, which Mr. Goodwin obtained this morning before you arrived, show you entering at 7:42 and leaving at 8:51. Your father's assistant had left at 6:30. They were alone for over an hour." He paused. "What did you discuss?" A long moment. Marcus looked at his hands. When he looked up, the architecture of his composure had been adjusted, rather than abandoned, the mark of a genuinely controlled man. "He told me," Marcus said carefully, "that the revisions were more significant than I'd anticipated. He told me that the firm's management structure was changing. He did not tell me the specifics, but I inferred them." "How?" "From his manner, from the questions he wouldn't answer. He stopped. I was angry. I won't deny that. I'd given 15 years to that firm. I thought he was making a mistake. And you told him so. I told him I thought he was making a mistake. He told me he appreciated my perspective and had reached different conclusions. Marcus's jaw set. He was perfectly calm, which was infuriating. Did you threaten him? The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. No, Marcus said, and the flatness of it had the specific texture of truth rather than denial. Miss Crane, Wolfe moved his gaze. You also visited the office that evening. Sylvia's chin came up. After Marcus left, I knew Marcus was going to speak to Father. I'd tried to talk him out of it. When he came back to his apartment, he was... She glanced at her brother. He was upset. I went to see Father myself. What time did you leave? A little after 10. And what passed between you? I asked him if Marcus was right about the changes. He said some changes were being made. I asked him if we discussed it together, as a family, whether it might be different. He said the decisions were made, and they were the right decisions. And he hoped we would come to understand that. And he looked at me with... She stopped. Something real was happening in her face, something that didn't have the quality of performance. He looked at me with a kind of love that was also absolutely immovable. And I knew there was nothing more to say. Did he indicate he was afraid of anything, worried about his safety? No. He seemed at peace with something, as though a difficult decision had been made, and he was past the difficulty of it. Wolfe looked at Faber. Mr. Faber, the liquidation analysis you prepared in mid-September, who, besides yourself and Mr. Hallowell-Bourne, had access to it? No one should have, Faber said. Then he paused, with the scrupulous precision of a man who means exactly what he says. The file was on the firm's shared drive, in a restricted folder. Access should have been limited to myself and Mr. Hallowell-Bourne. Should have been, Wolfe said. Administrator-level access to the drive is held by 4 people. Myself, Mr. Hallowell-Bourne, the IT director, and... He stopped. And Marcus Hallowell-Bourne, I said. Faber looked at Marcus. Yes. Marcus said nothing. His face was doing the work of containing something. Mr. Dane, Wolfe looked at the attorney. The sealed copy of the revised will in Mr. Hallowell-Bourne's office safe. Who knew the combination? Reginald knew it. I knew it. He gave it to me in the event of his incapacitation. I believe his assistant... I knew it, Eleanor Voss said. She said it quietly, into her envelope. He trusted me with it. Has the safe been opened since his disappearance? She looked up. Yes. 2 weeks ago. Marcus came to the office and said he needed to retrieve some financial documents from the safe for continuity purposes. She stopped. I opened it for him. And the documents in the safe? There were financial documents, and there was a sealed envelope. Mr. Hallowell-Bourne had put a copy of the will drafts there, I think. It was there when I opened the safe. When Marcus left, she looked at her hands. I didn't check whether it was still there. I should have. It's gone, Marcus said. His voice was flat and controlled and entirely honest. I took it. I took the draft copies. I wanted to know what was in them. He looked at Wolfe with the directness of a man who has decided that partial honesty is no longer viable. I read them. I know what he was doing. And I want to be very clear that knowing didn't. He stopped. It didn't make me do anything. I found out, and I was furious, and I went home, and I sat with it. And then? Wolfe asked. And then I found your card on Constance's sideboard 3 days later, and decided that whatever Constance was doing, I wanted my father found. Whatever he decided about the will, he's still my father. The room was very quiet. I looked at the 5 faces and tried to arrange what I'd heard into something that resolved properly. And it didn't resolve yet. There was still something off. Some structural element that didn't fit, like a door in a wall that's a half-inch proud of the frame. Wolfe looked at Eleanor Voss. Miss Voss, he said, gently for him. The envelope. She held it for a moment longer. Then she leaned forward and set it on his desk. It was a standard business envelope sealed with tape, with nothing written on it. He gave it to me at 6:15 on October 3rd, she said. He said, hold this, Eleanor. If I ask for it back in person, give it to me. If someone else asks for it, hold it until you hear from me directly. If you don't hear from me in 30 days, open it and do what it says. 22 days, I said. Yes, 8 days remain. She looked at Wolfe. I'm giving it to you instead because I don't know what else to do, and because I think he anticipated something like this. He was very deliberate about the instructions. Wolfe looked at the envelope on his desk. Did he tell you who you might hear from? He just said. He looked at me and he said, some people will come asking. And then he straightened his jacket and said good evening and left. Her voice was steady and careful. He looked like a man who had made all the preparations he could make, and was now prepared to wait and see. Wolfe picked up the envelope. He held it for a moment in his massive hands. I am not going to open this today, he said. The 30 days have not elapsed, and I will honor the spirit of his instructions. He set it in his desk drawer. But I think I now understand the architecture of what occurred. Mr. Faber, I shall need a copy of the access logs for the restricted drive folder. All users, all dates. Mr. Dane, I shall need your honest assessment of one specific legal question, which Archie will convey to you privately. The rest of you, go about your days. Don't leave the city. They left in clusters, Dane and Faber together, Sylvia pausing at the door to look back at the desk where the envelope had been. Marcus leaving last with the set expression of a man who has confessed to something and is now living with the peculiar lightness that sometimes follows. When they were gone, I pulled my chair closer. You know something, I said. I know several things, Wolfe said. I have known some of them since yesterday, but one element was missing, and Miss Voss provided it. He folded his hands over his imposing middle. Reginald Halliwell-Bourne is not dead, Archie. I looked at him. You're sure? I am quite sure. The $40,000, the envelope, the deliberate instructions, these are not the preparations of a man who fears death. They are the preparations of a man who intends to disappear temporarily and return on his own terms. He picked up his book. The question is not where he is. The question is whether he is safe, and whether the person he was testing has done something to find him before the 30 days are up. You think someone's looking for him. Someone has already been to his office and searched his safe, Wolfe said. That is not curiosity, that is urgency. An urgency of that kind has a specific cause. I thought about it. The will. If he dies intestate, or if the signed revision is never produced, the original documents stand, Wolfe said. And under the original documents, the management of Halliwell-Bourne Capital passes to his children. He opened his book. Call Saul Cohen at the NYPD. Tell him Nero Wolfe requests a quiet look at financial transactions from the accounts of all 5 individuals over the past 30 days. Tell him it may become relevant to what I strongly suspect is not a disappearance, but an assault on an absent man's estate. He began to read. I picked up the phone. Outside, the October light was sharper now, cutting between the buildings at the angle it manages only a few weeks a year. Somewhere in the city, or perhaps not in the city at all, Reginald Halliwell-Bourne was waiting out his 30 days, trusting that his preparations were sufficient and that his instructions would be honored. He'd made his move. The board was in play, and from somewhere not visible, a player was responding. Not honestly. Thursday morning arrived the way most October mornings do in New York, when something is about to break. Cold, clear, and with the specific quality of light that makes everything look both more real and more fragile than it actually is. I had eggs and Fritz's exceptional brioche, refused a second cup of coffee on the grounds that I needed my hands steady, and was out the door by 8:15 with a list in my pocket, and the particular alertness that comes from knowing a case has reached the phase where the next thing you find will matter. Saul Cohen, my contact at the NYPD who operates in the comfortable zone between official and unofficial assistance, had come through by 7 that morning, with a preliminary summary of financial activity across the 5 accounts. I'd read it over breakfast and marked 3 items that I intended to investigate personally rather than by telephone. Telephone is fine for confirmation. For the kind of information that requires a human face to extract, you need to show up in person and watch what happens when you do. The first stop was Halliwell-Bourne Capital's IT department, which occupied a windowless suite on the 13th floor that smelled of cold air and machine heat. The IT director was a 40-year-old named Gerald Sprague, who had the mild, slightly martyred expression of a man who has spent his career keeping systems running for people who don't understand systems and take them for granted. He was, in consequence, exactly the kind of person who notices things that no one else bothers to notice, because he is the one who has to fix them afterward. I introduced myself, explained my connection to the case in general terms, and asked about the access logs for the restricted drive folder. He had them ready. Faber had called ahead. 3 access events on the restricted folder in the month of September, Sprague said, pulling them up on his screen. Faber on the 14th, accessing and editing. Halliwell-Bourne Sr. on the 18th, reading only. And, he pointed, a 3rd access on September 26th, admin credentials. Marcus Halliwell-Bourne, I said. His admin account, yes, read only, 6 minutes 53 seconds. He looked at me with the professional neutrality of a man who registers facts without editorializing. He accessed the folder and read the document. The access was at 11:47 at night. September 26th was a Saturday. He accessed the firm's drive at midnight on a Saturday. That's what the log says. Is that unusual? Mr. Marcus accessed the drive at unusual hours regularly. He was a night worker. Sprague paused. What was unusual was the folder. He'd never accessed that particular restricted folder before. Hadn't touched it in the 18 months since it was created. So Marcus had lied to me, partially and precisely, in the way that careful liars do. He'd told me he'd read the drafts when he opened the safe, 2 weeks ago. He hadn't mentioned that he'd read the liquidation analysis on September 26th, 3 days before confronting his father, and 5 days before Reginald Halliwell-Bourne withdrew $40,000 in cash. The sequence assembled itself with uncomfortable clarity. Marcus sees the liquidation analysis on the 26th. He confronts his father on the 29th. His father has already anticipated someone finding the analysis. It was, as Wolfe had theorized, the move, the deliberately accessible bait. The question was what Marcus had done with what he found. The financial logs Cohen had sent me contained the second item I needed to investigate. Marcus Halliwell-Bourne had made 3 transfers in the preceding 30 days. 2 were routine, mortgage, investment account rebalancing. The third was a wire transfer on October 5th, 2 days after his father disappeared, of $22,000 to an account at a private bank in Nassau. $22,000 to Nassau while his father was missing. That had a smell about it that I didn't like. The third item on my list required a different kind of legwork. I took the subway to Brooklyn, which I do approximately as often as I take the ferry to Staten Island, which is to say rarely, and with justification. The address I had was in Carroll Gardens, a neighborhood that had been in my grandparents' time solidly Italian working class, and was now something more complicated and considerably more expensive. The kind of careful anonymity that is designed to not quite hide while appearing to. I pushed the buzzer. Silence for a count of 20. Then a voice, male, older, with the specific controlled quality of a man who has decided something before answering. Who is it? My name is Archie Goodwin, I said. I work for Nero Wolfe. Your wife hired him. I think you know why I'm here, Mr. Halliwell-Bourne. Another silence, longer this time. I stood on the step and waited, which is something I've gotten better at over the years. Waiting at doors, which requires a particular stillness that doesn't come naturally to me, but which I've learned to produce. The lock clicked. The apartment on the second floor was small, clean, and inhabited in a specific way that suggests a person has been living carefully rather than comfortably. The kind of provisional occupancy that comes from camping out rather than settling in. There was a folding table with a laptop, a good chair, a coffee maker, a shelf with 7 or 8 books. The books were about chess. Reginald Halliwell-Bourne was 64 and looked at the moment about 70. He was in good physical health. That was apparent from how he moved and held himself. But he was carrying something heavy in the way he occupied the room. The weight of a man who has been waiting alone with a decision for 3 weeks and has had ample time to feel every dimension of it. He was tall, with the structural remnants of what had been a formidable physical presence, and he looked at me with eyes that were sharp and tired and not particularly surprised. "Sit down, Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Thank you." I sat. "You're not as hard to find as you meant to be." "No," he agreed. He sat across from me. "I expected to be found eventually. I didn't expect it to be Wolfe. I hoped it would be, but I didn't expect it." "You know his work?" "I've followed certain of his cases in the press." A pause. "A man in my position, when planning a strategic withdrawal, thinks carefully about who might be sent to find him. If it was the police, manageable. If it was someone hired by the wrong person, dangerous. If it was Wolfe, he studied his hands. If it was Wolfe, it meant Constance had done the right thing, and I was probably safe to surface." "What did you need to be safe from?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a Brooklyn street delivered its ambient testimony. A car, a child, someone calling a name. "I need you to understand something," he said. "What I did, the disappearance, the cash, all of it, was not a flight. It was a forcing function. I am a businessman, Mr. Goodwin. I have spent 40 years solving problems through the strategic application of resources and pressure. When I realized that someone close to me was prepared to do something criminal to influence my estate, I had a choice. I could confront them directly, which would resolve nothing and prove nothing. Or I could create a situation that would reveal the depth of their commitment to that criminal course. So I disappeared. To see what they'd do. To see what they'd do, he confirmed, and to be safely out of reach while they did it, and to give Prescott Dane time to finalize and register the new documents in a jurisdiction where they could not be interfered with." He looked at me steadily. "The Nassau account. You found it. 22,000 from Marcus, October 5th. The account belongs to my attorney in Nassau. I have been working with him since August on the offshore registration of a trust that holds the revised estate documents. When Marcus sent the money, I assume as some kind of, I don't know, bribe or attempt to influence the process." He stopped. "I learned about it from my Nassau attorney 3 days ago. That was when I knew for certain it was Marcus." "What was Marcus trying to buy? Information, or delay, or the suppression of the revised documents?" He shook his head slowly. "My son is not evil, Mr. Goodwin. I want to be clear about that. He is frightened, and he has made a bad choice out of fear. But the choice is made, and it cannot be unmade." I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been sitting at the back of my mind since Tuesday afternoon, when a woman in expensive black had sat in the red chair in the brownstone and told me her husband was gone. "The envelope," I said. "The one you left with Eleanor Voss. What's in it?" He looked at me for a long moment, and then for the first time since I'd come into the room, something in his face relaxed. Not into weakness, but into the specific quality of a man who has been carrying a thing alone, and is ready, finally, to set it down. "A letter," he said, "for Marcus." I was back at the brownstone by 2 in the afternoon, and I will say that the experience of sitting across the desk from Wolfe and telling him I had found the missing man alive and well in a Carroll Gardens walk-up was one of the more satisfying moments of a career that has had a few of them. Wolfe listened to my full account without interrupting, which is how I know when he is paying maximum attention. The interruptions are reserved for moments when my narrative needs correction, and their absence means I'm giving him what he needs. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. then made the sound, a low, resonant expulsion of air, that serves as his version of a standing ovation. "The letter to Marcus," he said. "He told you the contents?" "He read it to me. I have it here." I tapped my notebook. Verbatim, as near as I could get it. He was precise about the wording. He'd thought about it for a long time. "Read it." I opened the notebook. It said, "Marcus, if you are reading this, then 30 days have passed, and either I am unable to return, or I have chosen not to return without first saying this. I know you saw the analysis and understood its implications. I know you came to my office not to discuss my decision, but to change it. I am not angry with you for that. I am, perhaps, disappointed. But disappointment is the tax a parent pays for having expectations, and I've paid that tax before. What I need you to understand is that my decisions were made not against you, but for something larger than either of us. The firm is not our legacy, Marcus. What we do with what we've built, that is our legacy. I have spent 40 years learning that lesson, and I am sorry I could not find a way to teach it to you more gently. The management trust is not a punishment. It is, I hope, a liberation. You will understand it as such, eventually. Your father. The office was quiet when I finished reading. Outside, the city went about its business with its customary indifference to human complexity. A man, Wolfe said, after a moment, who plans a strategic disappearance and writes a letter like that is either a profoundly thoughtful person or a profoundly theatrical one. Having met him, I'd say both, I said, in about equal measure. He has that quality, the chess player's quality, of always being 3 moves ahead, and also finding the whole game genuinely beautiful. Yes. Wolfe picked up his beer. Now let us talk about what actually happened. He set the beer down with the deliberateness of a man calling a meeting to order. We have 5 people, he said. We have established that Marcus Halliwell-Bourne accessed the liquidation analysis on September 26th and confronted his father 3 days later. We have established that he subsequently took the will drafts from the office safe, wired $22,000 to a Nassau account, and has been throughout this investigation presenting a version of events carefully calibrated to omit these activities. Right. We have established that Sylvia Crane also visited her father on the night of September 29th, after Marcus had left, and that she found him in a state of apparent equanimity. Her behavior throughout has been consistent with a person who is genuinely worried about her father's safety, rather than his testamentary decisions. He paused. She is not involved in any active interference. I agree, I said. Dwight Faber prepared the liquidation analysis in good faith, and did not otherwise act. He provided us accurate information about the drive access, and has been forthcoming. He is not involved beyond his professional role. Another pause. Prescott Dane has managed a delicate position, holding privileged information, aware that his client had engineered his own disappearance, yet constrained by ethical obligations from revealing this. He told us what he could and held what he had to hold. He acted properly. Which leaves Eleanor Voss, I said. Yes. Wolfe folded his hands. Miss Voss, who knew the safe combination, who was the last person to see Halliwell-Bourne on October 3rd, who opened the safe for Marcus, without, by her own account, checking afterward whether its contents were intact, who has been on personal leave since the day after the disappearance, sitting alone in a Murray Hill apartment with a sealed envelope, and, I suspect, considerably more knowledge than she admitted to us. I thought about Eleanor Voss's face, the tiredness, the specific quality of her restraint. She knows where he is, I said, or knew. She arranged the apartment in Carroll Gardens, Wolfe said, or someone did, with her assistance. 11 years as a personal assistant to a man of Halliwell-Bourne's organizational exactness. She would have been indispensable to the logistics of a planned disappearance, cash management, residential arrangement, communication protocols. She's not on leave, I said. She's been running his support operation. From a safe distance, yes. The instruction he gave her about the envelope, if you don't hear from me in 30 days, was not an instruction to a person who might not hear from him. It was insurance, and she was the holder of it. He communicated with her throughout. Wolfe picked up the beer he'd set down earlier. She was protecting him, not grieving him. That is why her grief when you visited had the quality of exhaustion rather than loss. I thought back to her apartment, the way she'd held the envelope. She was tired, I said, but not broken. There's a difference. Precisely. Wolfe drank. Now, let us examine Marcus Hallowell-Bourne with more precision. He is the active participant in what has occurred, but we must be careful about the nature of his activity. He set the glass down. He accessed the liquidation analysis and drew a reasonable but incorrect conclusion that his father intended to sell the firm. He confronted his father, who confirmed that significant changes were coming, but did not specify what they were. Marcus, concluding the worst, wired money to a Nassau account he had somehow identified as connected to his father's planning. How did he identify the Nassau account? That is the question I intend to ask him. The likely answer is that he found a reference to it in the materials in the safe. The draft documents may have included references to the offshore trust. He paused. But here is what matters, Archie. Marcus did not harm his father. He did not arrange the disappearance. He found his father gone, panicked, and took actions that were legally dubious and ethically compromised, but that fall short of anything more serious. You're sure he didn't know his father had staged it? He wired $22,000 to an account connected to the man he thought had vanished. That is not the behavior of someone who knows the disappearance is staged. That is the behavior of someone who thinks the disappearance is real and is desperately trying to influence the legal aftermath. Wolfe's eyes were half closed. He is guilty of tampering and fraud. He is not guilty of anything worse. And his father, I think, knows this, which is why the letter he wrote is a father's letter, not a prosecutor's statement. So the crime, if there is one, is the Nassau wire, and the theft of documents from the safe, which is at minimum a civil matter. Wolfe opened his eyes. What we have, Archie, is not a murder mystery. It is something more complicated, and in its way, more interesting. A man who understood that someone he loved was about to do something irreversible and wrong, and who arranged circumstances to catch them in the act, at a level where the damage could be contained and the relationship potentially preserved. He staged his own disappearance to keep Marcus from doing something worse, I said. He staged it to reveal exactly how far Marcus would go. And Marcus, under the pressure of what he believed was the real and permanent loss of his father's presence and his father's regard, went far enough to reveal his priorities, but not so far as to cross the line his father was most afraid he'd cross. Wolfe paused. The $40,000 in cash was also a test. He wanted to see whether Marcus would attempt to access those funds. He did not. What was the cash actually for? Living expenses. 3 weeks in a Brooklyn apartment is not expensive when you are a man who has chosen simplicity. The remainder is, I imagine, still in cash somewhere in that apartment. He stood, which meant the analytical portion of the afternoon was over, and the movement toward resolution was beginning. Tomorrow morning I want them all here again, all 5, including Hallowell-Bourne himself. Arrange it. You want me to bring him in? He has been waiting for this. He will come willingly. Wolfe moved toward the door. Oh, and Archie, ask Fritz to prepare the saddle of lamb for dinner tonight. I find I have an appetite commensurate with the scale of the conclusion. I sat for a moment after he left, looking at my notebook. Outside the office window, the October light was going amber with the approach of evening, and the brownstone on West 35th Street sat in it with the solid, unperturbed confidence of a place that has seen a great many complications resolved within its walls, and expects to see a great many more. I picked up the phone and started making calls. Getting Reginald Hallowell-Bourne to agree to return to his own life was, as it turned out, less difficult than I'd expected. He was ready. The 30 days weren't up yet, but the game had proceeded to the point where the outcome was determined. And a man who understood chess understood that playing out a decided position was pointless. He listened to my account of what Wolfe had deduced, confirmed what was accurate, corrected one minor detail about the Nash account, and said he would be at the brownstone at 9 Friday morning. "Should I call my wife?" he asked when I was leaving. "Mr. Wolfe will handle the choreography," I said. "He prefers it." The truth was that Wolfe had very specific ideas about the sequence of revelation in a final summation, and Constance Halliwell-Bourne's reaction to seeing her husband alive would be more useful, and more honest, in front of the assembled parties, than it would be in a private call the night before. I didn't say this to Reginald, who seemed to understand it anyway. Before the Friday morning assembly, I had one more piece of business to conduct, and I conducted it Thursday evening, with more delicacy than I usually bring to what is essentially a confirmation exercise. I called Marcus Halliwell-Bourne. He answered on the second ring, and his voice had in it the guarded quality of a man who has been waiting for calls he doesn't want, and screening ones he does. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Mr. Halliwell-Bourne, I have one question, and I'd appreciate a straight answer, because things will go considerably better for you tomorrow if I have it now rather than later." A pause. "Ask it." "The Nassau account. How did you identify it?" A longer pause. I could hear him deciding, not whether to tell me, I thought, but how much to tell, and in what order. "There was a memo," he said finally, "in the safe, with the draft documents. A communication between my father and his Nassau attorney, confirming the registration of the offshore trust. It had the account details." Another pause. "I realize how it looks. I realize the wire looks like I was trying to." He stopped. "I wanted to understand what was in the trust. I thought if I contacted the attorney, offered some consideration, he might tell me whether the firm's management structure was affected." "And did he?" "He returned the money." A pause that had in it a quality I hadn't heard from Marcus before. Something that might have been shame, if you were looking for it. "He returned it and sent a letter saying he was not in a position to discuss his client's affairs, and that if I attempted further contact, he would be obliged to inform his client immediately." A beat. I stopped. "When you stopped, was it because of the attorney's letter, or because of something else?" The longest pause of the conversation, because I found myself sitting at my desk at 2 in the morning, having just attempted to bribe a foreign attorney in connection with my missing father's estate. And I looked at what I was doing, and he stopped, and I stopped, he said simply. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow at 9. I hung up, and sat for a moment in the evening quiet of my room in the brownstone, which is not a large room, but is arranged exactly as I want it, and has served as a satisfactory place for thinking over the years. What Marcus had described, the moment of recognition, the stopping, was precisely what his father had been waiting to discover. Whether the test had worked out as Reginald had hoped, or merely as well as he'd feared, was a question for the morning. Wolfe, when I gave him the account over dinner, was eating the saddle of lamb with the focused, respectful attention he gives to Fritz's better productions. And he heard me out without interrupting, and then was quiet for a count of about 30 seconds. "He stopped," Wolfe said. "He stopped." He took another bite. "Then the letter will not be necessary." "The one in the envelope?" "The will," he said. "The revised will, the management trust, the foundation. Halliwell-Bourne has achieved what he sought. He has seen under pressure that his son's fundamental character is not criminal, merely frightened and acquisitive under fear, which is a different thing entirely. A father who creates a situation to discover whether his son is capable of something irrevocable, and discovers that he is not, has learned something he wanted very much to know. Do you think he'll change the will back? That is not our business." Wolfe picked up his fork again. "Our business is the revelation of facts. The disposition of those facts belongs to the Halliwell-Bournes. He regarded the lamb with satisfaction. Ask Fritz to come in. I want to compliment him on the preparation, and then I want to go to bed. I need my faculties entirely intact tomorrow. He got his 8 hours, and when I came down for breakfast on Friday morning, he was already in the office at his desk, which is unusual for Wolfe before 11, with 2 cups of coffee that Fritz had evidently prepared for the occasion, a yellow legal pad, and the expression of a man who has arranged something to his satisfaction and is now simply waiting for it to unfold. The envelope from Eleanor Voss was in the center of his desk. At 8:50, Fritz let in Constance Halliwell-Bourne, who arrived first and took the red chair with the controlled composure that was her consistent register. At 9:03, Sylvia and Marcus arrived together, which was itself a change from 2 days prior, when they had arrived in the careful separate proximity of siblings managing a shared difficulty. They sat next to each other. The 18 inches of psychological space was gone. Whatever had passed between them since Wednesday had reduced the distance. Faber came at 9:05, precise to the point of near lateness. Dane at 9:07, looking at the assembled room with the careful neutrality of a man who suspects he knows what is about to happen and has decided to trust the process. Eleanor Voss at 9:10, which made her the last of the 5. She sat down, looked at the envelope in the center of Wolfe's desk, and then looked at Wolfe. Something in her face, very small, carefully managed, but unmistakable to someone who had been watching her for 3 days, shifted. Not fear, not surprise, recognition. We will wait one more moment. The doorbell rang. I heard Fritz's footsteps in the hall, then voices. One of them, Fritz's small exclamation of surprise, quickly contained, and then the door to the office opened, and Reginald Halliwell-Bourne walked in. The room did several things simultaneously. Constance rose from the red chair and stood very still, the way people stand when they are managing an emotion too large for ordinary physical response. Sylvia made a sound, brief, involuntary, and pressed her hand over her mouth. Marcus went absolutely rigid, every muscle in his face and body tightening against whatever was occurring in his chest. Faber said quietly, "Good God." Dane said nothing. He was the only person in the room besides Wolfe and me who had, I suspected, known or strongly suspected this moment was coming. And he received it with the grave, contained relief of a man who has been holding a weight for 3 weeks and has just been permitted to set it down. Reginald Halliwell-Bourne looked around the room. His gaze moved from his wife to his daughter to his son, and it rested on Marcus the longest. And what it contained was not accusation, and not forgiveness exactly, but something prior to both: recognition. The look of a man who has had a question answered, and has found the answer livable. "Sit down, Mr. Halliwell-Bourne," Wolfe said. "I have a number of things to explain, and then I believe you have a few as well. Nero Wolfe does not do things for effect. That distinction matters, because his summations, and this one was conducted with the full architecture of his best work, can easily be mistaken for theater. They are not theater, they are engineering. When he assembles the parties and begins, he is not performing the solution, he is constructing it, in public, so that every person in the room understands not only the conclusion, but the load-bearing structure that supports it. He does this partly because it is more honest than a private declaration, and partly because it is more durable. A truth that has been demonstrated cannot be as easily denied as one that has merely been announced. He sat behind his desk, with his hands folded, and his eyes moving from face to face, and he began. Reginald Halliwell-Bourne was not the victim of a crime, he said. He was the architect of a situation designed to elicit information he could not obtain by any other means. Let me explain the construction. He paused, with the composure of a man who has never in his life been rushed by an audience. In August of this year, Mr. Halliwell-Bourne began the process of revising his estate documents in ways that would materially alter the expectations of his children, Marcus and Sylvia. The substance of that revision, The replacement of direct management succession with a professional trust was arrived at after prolonged reflection and is not, in itself, remarkable. What is remarkable is that while undertaking this revision, he began to suspect that someone was aware of it. "He told me this," Dane said quietly, from his chair. "He told you obliquely," Wolfe said. "He did not tell you he had laid a trap. He told you he had made a move and was observing the response. The trap was this. He instructed his CFO, Mr. Faber, to prepare a liquidation analysis of the firm, formatted not as an estate document, but as a sale prospectus. The folder containing this analysis was placed on the firm's shared drive, in a restricted location to which administrator-level access existed." He looked at Marcus. "You accessed that folder on September 26th. Marcus said nothing. "You drew the conclusion your father intended you to draw, that the firm was being prepared for sale rather than passed through a management trust. This was incorrect, but the error was designed. Your father wanted to know whether you would, upon believing the firm was to be sold, take actions that revealed the depth of your commitment to acquiring or preserving control of it." Constance, from the red chair, was watching her stepson with an expression that was not unkind, but was very clear. "You confronted your father on September 29th, Wolfe continued. "He confirmed that significant changes were coming. He did not correct your misapprehension about a sale, because he wished to see how you would respond to that belief. 3 days later, he withdrew $40,000 in cash for living expenses during a planned absence. And on the evening of October 3rd, he arranged for Miss Voss to hold the sealed envelope you see on this desk, and he departed for a prepared residence in Brooklyn. He has been there for 22 days. Sylvia let out a long, slow breath. Marcus was looking at his father with an expression that was doing a great deal of work. Miss Voss, Wolfe said, was complicit in the preparation, and was aware throughout that Mr. Halliwell-Bourne was alive and well. She managed the practical logistics of his absence, the apartment, the communication protocol, the management of his personal correspondence. Her leave of absence was coordinated with him. She was not a grieving assistant. She was a trusted confederate, performing the final assignment of a long service. He looked at Eleanor Voss, a role she filled with loyalty and discretion. She met his gaze steadily. "He asked me to," she said. "That was sufficient." "Quite." Wolfe returned to the room. "Now, what did the trap produce?" Marcus, upon Mr. Halliwell-Bourne's disappearance, did 3 things. He entered the office safe, using Miss Voss's assistance, and removed the draft documents. He reviewed them, and discovered the actual content of the revision, not a sale, but the management trust. He then identified, through those documents, the offshore Nassau trust account, and made a wire transfer of $22,000, intended either as an inducement to the Nassau attorney to reveal or suppress the trust's terms, or as some form of influence on the legal process. He paused. The transfer was returned. When it was returned, Marcus stopped. He let that settle. "The question before us," Wolfe said, "is what the stopping signifies. Mr. Halliwell-Bourne arranged this entire situation to discover whether his son, under the pressure of perceived loss and financial threat, would cross an irreversible line. The wire transfer approached that line. Its return, and Marcus's decision not to attempt further action upon its return, did not cross it." He picked up the envelope from Eleanor Voss, from the center of his desk, and held it. "This envelope contains a letter from Mr. Halliwell-Bourne to his son. It was prepared before the disappearance, and was to be opened only if 30 days elapsed without contact. It was an instrument of last resort, to be used if the situation had resolved in the worst possible way." He set it back on the desk. "It will not be needed in the form originally intended." He looked at Reginald Halliwell-Bourne, who was sitting to the left of the assembled group, slightly apart from the others, watching the room with the controlled attentiveness of a man at a chess match. Mr. Hallowell-Bourne, Wolfe said, I believe you have something you wish to say. Reginald looked at Wolfe, then at his son. I want to say, he said, that what I did was calculated and deliberate, and that it was also, in retrospect, something that required more of the people who love me than I had the right to ask. Constance, he looked at his wife, I owe you an account and an apology, and I will give you both, privately and at whatever length you require. He looked at Sylvia. You did nothing wrong. You were caught in something that wasn't yours, and I'm sorry. He looked at Dane. Prescott, thank you for holding the line. Then he looked at Marcus. They looked at each other for a moment that had in it everything that fathers and sons have ever contained in a silence. The decades of expectation and disappointment and love that is too complicated to name simply. The will stands as revised, Reginald said. The management trust goes forward, not as a punishment, and not because I doubt your ability, because I believe it is right, and because I believe you will come to understand that it is right. He paused. But I want you to remain at the firm, Marcus. I want you to run it, within the trust structure. The trust needs leadership as much as any other institution, and you are the best person for it. I'd like you to take that position, if you're willing. Marcus Hallowell-Bourne, controlled, architectural, expensive Marcus, pressed his lips together in the specific way of a man who is choosing not to speak until he is confident he can do so without something else escaping. He nodded, once. It was enough. Wolfe allowed the moment to breathe. He is better at this than people expect. The pausing, the allowing of human emotion its necessary space. Then he returned to the business at hand with the brisk efficiency of a man who has reached the final page. There are legal matters to address, he said. The wire transfer and its return create a technical legal exposure for Marcus that Mr. Dane is best positioned to assess and manage. The removal of documents from the safe is a civil matter. Mr. Dane will handle that, and Mr. Wolfe will handle the remainder. Hallowell-Bourne may choose to address it, or to decline to, as he sees fit. He looked at Reginald. I would recommend the latter. I intend to, Reginald said. Good. Wolfe looked at Miss Voss. Miss Voss's employment position is unchanged, as I understand it. Unchanged, Reginald confirmed. Unchanged and enhanced. Then the practical matters are in hand. Wolfe folded his hands. There is one remaining question, which I suspect several of you are too polite to ask directly. He looked at Marcus. You are wondering how I found your father. The answer is straightforward. Mr. Goodwin noticed 3 things during his interviews. That the cash withdrawal was sized for temporary living rather than permanent flight. That the instructions Miss Voss received were consistent with a controlled absence rather than a genuine disappearance. And that your father's demeanor in the final days, as described by multiple witnesses, was that of a man at peace with a difficult decision, rather than a man in fear. These observations, combined with the liquidation analysis gambit, suggested strongly that the disappearance was staged. He paused. A man who stages his own disappearance must live somewhere accessible and private, in a name adjacent to his own, since a false name requires identification he could not easily manufacture on short notice. R. Hallowell in Carroll Gardens was findable to anyone looking in the right direction. Constance looked at me. You found him. Mr. Wolfe did the deduction, I said. I did the door-knocking. That, she said, with the first warmth I had seen in her since the initial meeting, is a distinction I suspect you draw rather often. Every single case, I said. Wolfe dismissed the room with a finality that was courteous without being warm. He had done what he was paid to do, and saw no reason to extend the gathering beyond its functional purpose. They left in the same clusters they'd arrived in, but rearranged. Reginald and Constance left together, with the careful closeness of 2 people beginning a difficult, necessary conversation. Sylvia and Marcus went out side by side. Dane, shook Wolfe's hand with the specific gravity of one professional acknowledging another. Faber nodded and collected his coat with CFO efficiency. Eleanor Voss was last, again. She stopped at the door and looked back. "The envelope," she said. "Should I take it?" Wolfe picked it up from the desk and held it for a moment. "It belongs to Marcus," he said. "See that he receives it." A pause. "At a time of your choosing, I think you will know when." She took it and left. The office settled into the particular quiet that follows resolution. Not silence exactly, but a quality of stillness that has earned itself. Wolfe rose and moved toward the door to the hall, already ascending in the direction of his orchids. "A check from Mrs. Hallowell Bourne arrived this morning," I said. "Generous." "Good." He didn't pause. "Do the orchids need attention?" "Theodore has them in hand." "Then perhaps." "Fritz is making the duck with black cherries tonight," I said. "He told me this morning, with the Chambol Musigny." He stopped at the door and considered this. "Then everything," he said, "is in order." He went upstairs. I sat in the office for a few minutes after he left, in the chair behind my desk, with my notebook and the comfortable disorder of resolved case materials. Outside the windows of the West 35th Street brownstone, Manhattan performed its Thursday afternoon operations with customary indifference to the complications that had just been untangled within these walls. Here is what I knew, for the record. Reginald Hallowell Bourne had staged his own disappearance. He had done it with the precision of a man who has spent 40 years in the controlled application of strategy, and with the anguish of a father who loves his son enough to put them both through something terrible in order to find out whether the love is justified. It was, barely, and with margin for doubt, and with the acknowledgement that Marcus had gotten very close to a line he did not cross. But it was. Constance Hallowell Bourne had done the right thing in hiring Wolfe, and for the right reasons, and the fact that her reasons were also complicated by the ordinary human interests of a second wife in the disposition of a wealthy husband's estate did not make them less right. Most right things are also somewhat self-interested. That's what makes them credible. Sylvia Crane had done nothing except worry, which is underrated as a response to impossible situations. Dwight Faber had done his job. Eleanor Voss had done far more than her job. Prescott Dane had done exactly what a lawyer of genuine integrity does. He had told us what he could, held what he had to hold, and trusted that the process would take care of the rest. And Marcus had done something wrong, and knew it, and had stopped. Whether the stopping was character or fear, or some compound of both that doesn't have a clean name, I couldn't say. I suspect Reginald Hallowell Bourne couldn't say either. I suspect the letter in that envelope said something about that uncertainty, something a father could write only in the privacy of a Brooklyn apartment, under conditions of deliberate isolation, with 22 days to think. I'd have liked to read it. The duck with black cherries was, as it turned out, magnificent. Wolfe ate with the total focused appreciation he brings to Fritz's finest work, and we did not discuss the case at dinner, because Wolfe does not discuss concluded matters at the table. We talked about orchid propagation and a biography of Talleyrand that Wolfe had been reading, and I made a remark about chess that he declined to pursue, and Fritz came in twice with his characteristic mixture of pride and anxiety, and the Chambol Musigny was everything it should have been. Later in the office, with the after-dinner cognac and the renewed fire of an October night settling into its proper cold, I asked the question I'd been holding since that morning. "Did you know?" I said. "From the beginning, did you know he was alive?" Wolfe turned a page of his Talleyrand. "I suspected," he said, "from the third hour of the first meeting. A woman who believes her husband is dead grieves in a specific way. A woman who is performing grief because it is expected, while privately calculating, does so in a different way. Mrs. Hallowell Bourne's distress was genuine, but it was not the distress of bereavement. It was the distress of a woman who knows more than she can say, and is hoping that someone with sufficient intelligence will say it for her. She knew he was alive? She suspected. He had not told her, That would have required her to actively deceive the authorities, which he would not ask of her. But she knew him well enough to know he was not dead. What she did not know was what he was doing, or whether he was safe, or when he would return. He turned another page. Hiring me was her way of answering those questions, without admitting she had them. I thought about Constance Halliwell-Bourne in the red chair. Her controlled posture, the calculations behind the composed face. She played it very carefully, I said. She did. He closed the book. She is the most interesting person in the case, and she has gotten the least attention. Consider. She retained me, directed our investigation, withheld her own partial knowledge, and allowed the situation to develop to its natural resolution, all while managing the appearance of a straightforwardly worried wife. That requires considerable discipline. He rose. Good night, Archie. Good night. He went upstairs. I sat for a while longer with my cognac in the fire. In the end, what we had found was not a crime but a test, and not a mystery but a family, which is, in its way, the more complicated and the more interesting of the two. A man had vanished in order to see what would happen, and what had happened was this. His son had reached for something he shouldn't have reached for, and had then, at the last moment, pulled his hand back. His daughter had worried, without adding to the damage. His wife had trusted, without revealing she trusted. His assistant had been faithful beyond the scope of any job description. And his attorney had kept a chessboard mid-game, waiting. Somewhere across the city, in a house that was about to be inhabited again, a 64-year-old man with a complicated legacy and a talent for strategic thinking was explaining himself to his wife. Whether that conversation would go well was beyond our jurisdiction. I hoped it would. He had earned something like grace, even if the method had been somewhat extravagant. I locked up the brownstone, turned off the office lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow, Wolfe would have his orchids and his book, and his breakfast and his beer, in the fixed and reliable order of a life arranged precisely as he wanted it. And I would find something to do with myself until the next person rang the bell and brought their complications into the office on West 35th Street. They always do. In this city, at this address, they always do.